Oh, morning all. Just doing the link.
Morning, Debbie. You all right? Sorry, I'm just washing up. How are you?
Fine, I'm okay.
You all right? You had a lie-in?
No.
Morning all.
Somebody pinched the washer out my nose.
Oh, okay. I've had one of those days, yeah.
Oh. I have one of those days every day. My nose could run for England if it was an Olympic sport.
Well, you take the ladies one for England, and I'll take the men's one for England, okay?
Okay, that's fair enough.
Okay, we're going to start in a minute.
Yeah.
Just doing the show.
Let's turn my radio off.
Rabbi, I've got a bone to pick with you.
1 second. Just 1 second. It's not working. Just, yeah, 1 sec. 1 sec. Okay, never mind. Yes, Iris, what's up?
Why do we always have to miss out on the halakha shir when, for
Good
one
question.
reason or other, you can't make it until 10? And
Right.
why? And today, when we're here, you're here for the time for the halakha shir, we're still going to miss it because you've moved the Parsha shir earlier.
Good question. Good question. I don't know. To be honest, my thinking, I think, is that more people join the Parsha stream usually. But I don't know. It's open to discussion. But anyway, for now, let's do what we do because it's what I've prepared. But I can try not to miss it as much in future.
I mean, I know you can't
point.
always get there, but
yeah, fair point.
It's just
Fair
that
point.
today you're here at the time for the halakha shir, and we're still missing it.
Oh, fair point. Because we would have only had 15 minutes of Parsha then, because I've got a doctor's appointment. So it seemed that wasn't really worth doing 15 minutes.
No, well, we could have had an extra 15 minutes of halakha.
Fair point. Okay, I'll take that on board. Do other people share that view that we should stick to the time slots?
Yeah, I don't mind today, but I do like the halakha shir.
All right, point taken. So maybe we should stick to the time slots. Okay, thank you for raising that, Iris. In the meantime, I've got to do what I've prepared today, but points taken for the future. Hopefully won't have to miss it in future. Right, 1 second. If I'm honest, I've probably become a bit lax about the halakha shir. I probably shouldn't be. So I need to be a bit more protective of it, I suppose. Right. Just give me 10 seconds.
Here we go now.
Sorry, just give me 2 seconds. Just 1 sec, sorry. Just got to.
That's better. I can see now.
Right, sorry about that. Just dealing with kids. Okay, right. So, morning all. Let's start. 1 second. It's going to do its usual freeze, probably. Usually freezes at this point. Oh, it's freezing. Oh, there we go. Right, Iris, over to you. All right.
Moses' father-in-law Jethro hears of the great miracles which God performed for the people of Israel, and comes from Midian to the Israelite camp, bringing with him Moses' wife and 2 sons. Jethro advises Moses to appoint a hierarchy of magistrates and judges to assist him in the task of governing and administering justice to the people. The children of Israel camp opposite Mount Sinai, where they're told that God has chosen them to be his kingdom of priests and holy nation. The
Oh,
people
lost you.
respond by proclaiming, "All that God has spoken, we shall do."
Right, sorry, it's stuck.
On the 6th day of the 3rd month, Sivan, 7 weeks after the Exodus, the entire nation of Israel assembles at the foot of Mount Sinai for the giving of the Torah. God descends on the mountain amidst thunder, lightning, billows of smoke, and the blast of the shofar, and summons Moses to ascend. God proclaims the 10 Commandments, commanding the people of Israel to believe in God, not to worship idols or take God's name in vain, to keep the Shabbat, honor their parents, not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, and not to bear false witness or covet another's property. The people cry out to Moses that the revelation is too intense for them to bear, begging him to receive the Torah from God and convey it to them.
Right, thank you. So today we're going to talk about Revelation. If you've ever been to any of these talks about proving the Torah is true, it's a favorite thing when they do all the Aish things and so on, right? We always talk about historical events and revelations, right? So, you know, most religions, there's a revelation to one person or a prophet or a group of people, right? Muhammad or Yoshka or the disciples or what's his name, Reverend Moon of what was it called, or the Latter Day Mormons. I can't think of his name. You know, it's one person, right? The unique thing about Judaism is we know that the revelation took place to the whole nation, right? I believe that's quite unique, right? In the various ways that God spoke to the nation, and also sorry, yeah, it wasn't to a group, it wasn't even to the elders, it was to the entire nation, right? We always talk about how the whole nation stood at Sinai. When people want to talk about the truth of Torah, one of the things they often say is that, you know, there's no historical there's no one historically that denied, you know, if it didn't happen, you would think of those 600,000 people that were supposed to have stood there, somebody would have told their great grandchildren it was all above them, right? And we don't have that. We do have a national revelation that everyone was present. So let's have a look. Source number 1. This is how it's described when we look back on it in the book of Devarim. Who'd like to read number 1?
I'll read.
This is my bar mitzvah, Cedric. I've seen it on. So, yeah.
You better read it then.
No, you go. It's not. Yeah.
Ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created man on earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this year ever happened? Or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire, as you have, and lived?
Right. So this is how Moshe views it. It's a question. It's very commendable that this whole revelation, you know, gives a weight to the truth of Torah, etc., etc. Is that really the only reason that people should not deny it? Because everyone was present. So one aspect is obviously the truth of it, the authenticity that millions witnessed it. But also there's a kind of political aspect to this, right? The theme of HMD, funny enough, was the fragility of freedom. So here at Sinai, you have a completely different type of a nation. Let's see what Lincoln said at the Gettysburg Address about the formation of America. Who'd like to read that? Number 2.
I'll read it if you like.
Yeah.
407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition of all men are created equal.
Right. So, if the Labour Party used to say for the many, not the few, right? And then they changed it to for the many, not the Jew, if you recall. But Egyptian society, you had few with power. Most people were enslaved, as we know. Well, certainly Jews were, right? So here you have the complete antithesis. You have something where every single person has access. Every single person is part of the revelation, right? So the covenant at Sinai actually is a very good precursor to what Lincoln had to say. And it's not an accident that particularly the United States talks all about its Judeo-Christian roots, right? Because where do you have a society that's held together not by power, but by free consent of citizens, by a moral code, by a covenant? The first example of that, of course, is the Jewish nation. So if you ask people the history of democracy, they'll tell you, oh, it was Greece and Athens and, the Greeks, and that was the birth of the modern democracy. But the truth is, that's not strictly true. Sinai is the ultimate sort of free society. Why is that so? There's three things. First of all, that long before we even entered the land, right, long before we had judges or kings, we have this covenant with God, right? It wasn't a covenant that came about when we had our own government or when we had our own land, right? When you talk about, are Jews ethnic or religious or national, right? And the answer is yes and no to all of the above, right? Because we indigenous the land of Israel. It's a central part of our identity, but we were Jewish before the land of Israel as a homeland concept existed, right? Before we even made it to the promised land, before we had any kind of government of our own. We have this covenant at Sinai, which had set the moral tone of our society. And also, even the king is not above the law. The king had to carry a Sefer Torah with him at all times to remind him that he was above the law was overarching, that he was not, he was just another human being. He wasn't above the law. Unfortunately, we know from communism that often democracy might have good intentions, but the reality is usually ends up being, I think, what they call the tyranny of the majority. And the majority rule doesn't guarantee the rights of minorities. As Lord Acton said about Athens, there was no law superior to that of the state. Let's say there, I can't see it.
Yeah.
The lawgiver was above the law. Right? So that's what happens when you have, right? You have in some societies, in corrupt societies, that politicians think they're above the law. Right? One of the things that, when they talk about Israel being a apartheid state, the most daft part of that is that it was an Arab judge that was able to lock up a former president. Right? Nobody is above the law. That's a democratic concept. It's a Jewish concept. In the book of Kings, God tells Elijah he must go to King Achav and tell him off because Achav seized Naboth's vineyard. I can't remember the exact story, but I think there was some romantic entanglement somewhere there. Anyway, here's what he said. Who'd like to read that? Nice short, number 4.
Okay, I'll do it.
Yep.
Thus says the Lord. No, I'm not talking to you, Jeff. Thus says the Lord, would you murder and take possession? So
just to be clear, this is the prophet going to the king and saying, God said you're in the wrong, mate, basically. Right? Now, in tales of old, it would be off with your head. How dare you challenge the king? But no, in Judaism, the king is not above the law. Right? Anyone think of any other recent examples of civil disobedience? This is very topical with Holocaust Memorial Day, about following orders and what happens when orders are immoral. The law is not everything, and certainly not when the law is twisted. Anyone think of a recent example we read in the Torah? Documented case of civil disobedience.
What, votes for women?
Are you talking?
Was it the man who went out on Sabbath and
No.
tried to get
Sorry,
manna?
Beryl, what were you saying?
Yes. I was saying, are we talking about Trump?
No, not talking about Trump. No. Recent case in the Torah and the Parshas we've read were people who disobeyed orders.
Okay.
At great expense and cost to themselves, potentially. I'll give you a clue. It helps secure the future leadership of the Jewish nation.
Secure the leadership.
So I didn't hear what you said.
You'll kick yourself. Go on.
Not Aaron's sons.
No, before that. We're not up to that yet.
No, that's what I thought.
What are we reading in the last few parshas?
The splitting of the
Plagues.
sea.
Before that.
Moses.
Thank you. Right. Here, let's have a look. Who'd like to read number 5?
Oh,
Oh, yes.
Shall I read it?
Go on, Pam.
The midwives, fearing Hashem, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live.
Right? It was the midwives, which tradition has with Miriam and Yocheved and Miriam, according to one tradition, wasn't it? Shifra and Puah, that very, very bravely disobeyed this despotic king, this king who's murdering babies, who would have, nowadays people say, if people have no choice but to become suicide bombers, because Hamas say otherwise they'll kill your family. I can't put myself in that position. I don't know what it's like to have that threat hanging over your head. But we see throughout history there were very brave people who defied regimes. Right? Now, thank God they were okay, but who knows what Pharaoh would have done to them. But nonetheless, we will not follow immoral orders. Okay? King Saul orders his servants to kill the priests of Nob because they gave shelter to David. Let's see what happens there. Who'd like to read number 6?
I'll do that one.
Go on, Jamie.
And the king said to the runners that stood about him, turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand is also with David. And because they knew that when he fled and did not reveal it to him, but the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord.
Right? So they defied the king, which again, Saul was a bit of a, he was quite manic at that point. Very, very risky to defy the king. Right? People will say, what would you do? Would you be a bystander? You read the story of Anne Frank. The unsung heroes are Meep and Ellie and the non-Jews that put themselves at great risk to save their Jewish neighbors. It's not with that. It's very easy to say, I wouldn't stand by, I would do something, but it's not. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. Often, if you would help somebody who's in a persecuted minority, you yourself would face persecution or death. Right? So it's not an easy thing. So we see that people were throughout Tanakh were prepared to defy the rulers when they were. It's an interesting precedent for not following orders, right? When the orders were immoral, the instructions were immoral. So as much as people might talk about Greek, the great bastions of democracy being in the Greek Empire, no, it's not. Actually, if you look, the ultimate protections, the whole politics that's going on in Israel before this war was about the Supreme Court and whoever's right and whoever's wrong, but about their reach and their role in democracy and how they affect the setting of law, etc. But that's one of the strengths of a democratic state, is that you can have that everything is subject to review and nobody is above the law. So that's number one. Number one is this incredible idea that once you have the Torah, which is an absolute code, then nobody is above that. Not the king and not the chief rabbi and not the, when we hear about often the hypocrisy of leadership, like you had under communism. There's a famous story with, I think it's Socrates or Plato, that I don't remember what it was. He was doing something that he'd told the students he shouldn't do, and they challenged him on it. I think it might have been something with a woman. Anyway, they challenged him on it, and he said, now I'm Plato the human being. Then I was Plato the, I'm not on duty sort of thing, right? We don't have that concept in Judaism, right? The leader of the community, that we've talked about this before. In fact, the dangers inherent when people have a God complex, when leaders think they're above the law, that they're untouchable, unimpeachable. Right? Trump might be an example of that, possibly. I don't know. But no one is above the law in Judaism, and the law is supreme, the Torah is supreme. So perversely, not perversely, ironically, when the king commands something which is immoral, so then the law suddenly, quote unquote, not the Torah law, but the orders given become immoral, then you have a duty not to follow them, as we see from examples. That's number one. Number two, somebody mentioned women voting, right? So the Blimmer said it came up on Shabbos about, all the commentators are men in the Torah. And I said, first thought on that is that whilst we say it's all divine and so on, that you've got to look at that in historical context. That, my mother happens to be an expert on women composers. She's written books on the subject, right? Mendelssohn's sister was a composer, Fanny Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn's sister. The fact is, like women authors, right? The fact is that until the last 100, maybe, not even. Max, till 200 years ago, women did not have roles in the public eye. You know, we still have a situation in this country where Princess Anne will not become the monarch despite being the oldest child. Or has that changed? No, that's changed for William's generation, I think. No, didn't it change? I think it's
Yes,
changed.
it
But, you
has.
know, so I don't think it's fair to just heap abuse on the rabbis of the Talmud and the commentaries and say they're all male. Everyone was male on most things until very recently. You know? Put it in context. So women have had to vote for what, 100 years in this country? 1920s? Suffragettes?
Yeah.
Right? You know, it's not so long. So meanwhile, who was at Sinai? Everyone.
Everybody.
Men, women, children. Not only that, but amazingly, let's have a look at what it says in this week's Cedric. Who'd like to read number 7?
Shall I read?
Go on.
This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob and tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession, for the whole earth is mine. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation.
Right. And what's their response? Go on, do you want to carry on, Julian?
Yep. All those assembled answered as one, saying, all that Hashem has spoken we will do. And Moses brought back the people's words to Hashem.
Now I know, because we're about to show the slide and someone's about to quote the midrash that says that, you know, the mountain was held over them like a barrel over their heads. But in the simple pshat of what the simple understanding of these verses, right? Even though God is almighty, all powerful, creator of heaven and earth, how does this go? He doesn't say, you will obey me or else I will bring the fire of heaven and earth upon you. He says that you've seen what I did in Egypt. You've seen what I did for you. If you will obey me and keep my covenant, if you will enter into this contract with me, then I will make you a kingdom, priest, and a holy nation. The people say, yes, we consent, right? We talk a lot about, right, rule by consent, government by consent, right? Here we have this, the consent of the governed, even though the government is the creator of heaven and earth, who can do what he wants. It's pretty radical, pretty radical. Right, now, let's just deal with it for a moment. We know that this is what is said in the Talmud. Who'd like to read number 9? Who hasn't read yet? Anyone?
I'll read.
Go on.
And they stood under, normally translated as at the foot of the mountain. This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, overturned the mountain above them like a cask and said to them, if you accept the Torah, it is well, but if not, this will be your burial place.
Right, so that is a famous Gemara. It says they didn't really have that much choice. Right. The other thing is, you know, you're standing in the desert. God gives you food. God gives you water. God gives you protection. God says to you, "Are you prepared to make to accept me as your only, deity and whatever? What are you going to say?" So interestingly, of course, we know that in the book of Esther it says they accepted what they previously accepted. And we know that one of the special things about Purim is that after Purim, it says they accepted the covenant, this time voluntarily. There's nobody holding a gun to their head at all. So if they didn't accept it then, they certainly accepted it later on. The truth is, that's not the only time. Let's look at what happens. Oh, no, it's not here. Sorry, 1 second. Let's, I haven't got it on the screen. In Devarim, at the end, it talks about how as they're about to enter the land, they made this covenant. And also in Joshua, talks about their renewing the covenant. So even if you actually say that initially at Sinai, it was all a bit coerced, it was pressure, it was the heat of the moment, and they couldn't say no. Subsequently, they reaffirmed the covenant a number of times. There is an important principle, which is also in the Talmud. Who'd like to read number 10? Who hasn't read yet?
I'll read again, if you like.
Yep.
The Holy One, blessed be he, does not heal tyrannically. Was it to?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a
With
Hebrew word. Yeah. With his creation. So there is this idea which you could challenge, say, well, what about this and what about that? But generally speaking, Hashem doesn't impose beyond what we're capable of, which means that we should always know that if something comes to us, we're capable of it. But anyway, that's a different point. So the idea that Hashem would be a tyrant that would threaten us, to bury us if we don't accept the Torah doesn't really fit with the general vibe of freedom and free choice. So just to go back, point number one, we have this, everyone's present. It's not just a revelation for one person. Everyone experiences this revelation. Point number two, we have this consent that we are asked to accept the terms. It's not a given that God will just dominate us. And that's point number two. And point number three, so let's have a look. Anyone knows what, who was at Sinai?
Everyone.
Men, women, and
Children.
right? Generally speaking, I don't know what happened then, but even if you go back till, how did the KKK start? They say, or possibly even the Freemasons, I don't know, a bunch of men that wanted to get away from their wives that would go out and, started a club, basically. So historically, men went out to hunt, to do whatever, and the women stayed home with the kids. How nowadays, we're a bit more aware. If you're having an event, you might make sure you have childcare. I must tell you, when they do rabbinic training, still, there aren't a huge number of rabbis and rebbes that have kids at home. Most put them in nursery from a young age, but there are plenty that have babies. And I got to tell you, they don't always think about childcare. So they say, Rebbitzon's welcome. So the first question you ask is, well, have you got childcare? Well, we haven't thought about it. So they're getting better now. These are basic things nowadays. If you wouldn't do something without thinking about childcare. If you go back to biblical times, I can't imagine that it was normal to have, oh, we're going out together as a couple. What? The women stay home. What are you talking about? So who is at Sinai? Men, women, and children. We have it also in the Hakel. This was, if you recall, after Sukkot in the year of the Shemitah year. This commandment is the 611th, I think it is, or 612th. I can't remember. It's one of the last couple of commandments, along with writing your own Sefer Torah. Let's read what the Torah tells us. Go on, who'd like to read? Who hasn't read yet? Or whose turn again?
I've read, but I'll read
Go on,
again.
Jeff, you can go. Go on.
Gather the people, men, women, children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere your God and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching. Their children too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn and revere your God, as long as they live in the land that you are about to cross the Jordan to possess.
Right, so you've got the men, the women, the children, all present for this. And the Hakel was a reenactment of the experience. And we spoke about this before, how if you want people to, the king would read the Torah, right? Would read the entire book, I think, of Devarim. So if you want to hear the Learning, don't have men, women, and kids at the same time. A lot of shuls, when it's Parsha Zachor, when you have to hear the Learning, will have a minyan, regular minyan, then later I'll have a minyan for women and children, or women so the men can watch the kids so they can hear the Learning, right? Megillah readings, a lot of places do that. Family readings and women's readings. So if you want to actually hear the Learning, don't bring the kids. But it's not about that. It's about the experience of being there. So meanwhile, in Athens, that great pantheon of democracy, wasn't everyone that got to hear it. Remember the film Life of Brian, where, they have to pretend, the women have to pretend to be men to go to the stonings? I know that's a joke, but I'm sure it wasn't that far from reality. I don't think women and children and slaves and foreigners were included. In Britain, women got the vote in 1918, apparently. In America, it was 1920. So that's just over 100 years ago. We're talking 3,300 and what is it? 3,300 and something years ago. 244, whatever it is. It's about 3,300 and something years ago. And God says, men, women, and children. Not only that, but like every person knows, who do you consult first? If you want to get common sense, you speak to the women first, right? What does it say? Go on, who'd like to read number 12?
Shall I read it again?
Yeah.
I read, it's all right, I'll just come
Oh,
back.
go on,
out.
Debbie, go.
I had a phone call, sorry. And Moses went up to God, called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel."
Right, so what's the difference between the house of Jacob and the children of Israel? So let's see what Rashi says. The house of Jacob.
The house of Jacob, this denotes the women. To them you shall speak in gentle language.
Right. Kosomar lebeis Yaakov. Omer means to say, to tell. Hagay means to give over in a slightly more strong way. So Rashi says, why do we need this double? You should say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, house of Jacob is the women, you should speak to them first. This is where Beis Yaakov, school is called Beis Yaakov, house of Jacob. Why house of Jacob? Jacob's a man, right? Why not Sarah? Because it says this is the women. So, wow, according to Rashi, not only were the women there, but they were the ones that got first dibs. That's pretty radical. Let's see what Rousseau has to say about the history of anti-Semitism. Let's have a look. Yeah, who'd like to read?
Iris will read.
Go on, Iris, over to you.
Okay.
I read.
You can if you
go
want to.
Good luck reading the Greek words. Go on, off you go.
Yeah. The Jews provide us with an astonishing spectacle. The laws of Numa, Lycurgus, Solon are dead. The very much older laws of Moses are still alive. Athens, Sparta, Rome have perished and no longer have children left on earth. Zion, destroyed, has not lost its children. What must be the strength of legislation capable of working such wonders, capable of braving conquests, dispersions, revolutions, exiles, capable of surviving the customs, laws, empire of all the nations, to last as long as the world? Any man, whosoever he is, must acknowledge this as a unique marvel, the causes of which, divine or human, certainly deserves the study and admiration of the sages, in preference to all that Greece and Rome offer.
Right, so let's just go back and summarize. The first thing we said about Sinai is the fact that everyone was present equally. It's not, Moses was there and he relayed it to everyone else, which isn't just, by the way, which is one of the problems with the truths of a lot of these religions, right? You're relying on one person and their recollection, their vision from God. Oh, God came to me and told me this, right? So with us, it was the entire nation. Number two, this idea that the people said, we will obey, we will do. Nasa v'nishma, this is consent of the governed, which is essential to democracy. You have to have consent. They talk about policing by consent as well, by the way, right? It's very difficult. I think they go too far to the other extreme now. But this is one of the problems with the Met at the moment, that, they're trying to want to keep everyone happy and so on. You can't police people if you're cracking down. Anyway, and the third thing is the role of the women, the children at the forefront, that it's long before anyone would speak out women's rights, we have the central stage of women. So let's see Rabbi Sacks in conclusion. Julian, would you like to read yours? Good luck reading Rabbi Sacks.
Okay. With the revelation at Sinai, something unprecedented entered the human horizon, though it would take centuries, millennia, before its full implications were understood. At Sinai, the politics of freedom was born.
So as with so many things in the Torah, things that now are just starting to emerge, things that went back to the dawn of time in our history. At Sinai, we were doing things that are extremely radical. I don't know if people saw them as radical then. I don't know. Interesting. Did people see it as radical that the women were included and not kept in the kitchen? I don't know. It's an interesting one. Would have been good for last week, actually. The very fact that they were just there at Sinai. It's explicit. And more than that, the Beis Yaakov, we're told that they were actually the ones that were first in line. It's pretty amazing. So there we go. That's thoughts for this week, from not just the giving of the Torah, 10 Commandments, but how it impacts society as a whole. And I said the HMD theme was fragility of freedom, actually ties in very nicely with the idea. How do you preserve freedom? Well, all these things. And it makes sure that you're not being exclusive, that everyone is included in your governance. Make sure that you have the consent of the governed, and make sure that you include those who are disadvantaged, those who are minorities, those who may be left behind. It's easy to disregard minorities when you have a majority. So there we go. Interesting take on it. Thanks to Rabbi Sacks, as ever. And we would have had time for a bit of halacha. I didn't realize that was going to be so quick. Sorry, Iris. Right. Any questions, comments?
I've always wondered about the strangers, how they took to this. Did they become?
Well, good question. So I think we're told you had, of course, the Erev Rav that left Egypt, who often get blamed for everything. So as I think we understand it, some of them converted. Yisro converted, right? He was so enamored with the Jewish people. But of course, the same Torah explains that you have to look after the stranger in your midst, which we understand as being a resident alien, someone who is a Noahide, who is a righteous non-Jew, who basically accepts principles of your governance. So the modern day example of that would be very simple. If you look at the state of Israel and its minorities, you have the Druze, for example, who are extremely loyal citizens who accept, who serve faithfully in the IDF and accept the sovereignty of the state of Israel and basically accept the rule of law. You have the Bedouins to a lesser degree, not all of them, and Israeli Arabs are a much more complex sector. So there are plenty who also are loyal citizens. But I mean, it's not just about citizenship in that sense, but that's how a very real example you would see in modern society. So you don't have to, you can be a minority that's protected, whose rights are protected without having to be expected to embrace what the majority does. I mean, Israel's an interesting example because you have obviously their legal discrimination along ethnic lines as to who has to serve in the IDF. I'll tell you another interesting thing. As far as I know, I might be wrong with this, if you are Bedouin, you can legally have more than one wife, which creates absolute havoc with the national security, social security, because your pension, if you die, goes to 3 widows and things like that. If I'm not mistaken, the state recognizes that because that is their culture and their law. It's interesting because the state of Utah does not recognize polygamy amongst the Mormons, etc. I'm not quite sure how they do that, but now you could say it's extremely discriminatory that if you are a Jew, you have to do certain things, and if you are a Jew, remember, is not necessarily a person of a particular ethnicity. So however you define a Jew, but if you are a Muslim Arab, then you don't have to go to the IDF, or you don't have certain obligations. You could say that's, imagine if British society said, if you're Indian or Pakistani origin, you don't have to do this, that, or the other. If you're Eastern European Ashkenazi, you don't have to do this, that, or the other. That would seem very racist. But for Israeli society, it probably works because of the needs of society. It's an interesting kind of setup, but because of the needs of society, it probably works very well. So you can respect, in fact, if you look in halacha, a resident alien sounds always scary, but a resident alien in the sense of my wife's a resident alien, somebody who's living legitimately in the country and accepts the laws of the country and has residential status, has full recourse in the same way that if you are a foreign national living in the UK and a crime is committed against you, you have full recourse under the law, right? And if you go to court, Tommy Robinson might say, well, you ain't British, mate, but the legal system will give you, hopefully, you would hope, the full rights under the law of a citizen. The same in state under halacha, if I'm not mistaken, a ger toshav, which is a resident non-Jew who accepts the rule of law, basically the Noahide laws, can go to Beis Din, for example, for civil matters. They have standing in Beis Din, if I'm not mistaken. They have legal protections. So you have this context. In answer to the question, I believe a number of the foreign, if you like, foreigners who got picked up along the way did convert because they saw the truth of Torah, but not everyone did. And there was always, I don't know if anyone's seen recently, it's interesting, I don't know if people follow these things. There's a lot of discussion about which celebrities support Israel and pro-Palestinian and whatever. So Angelina Jolie has been a bit disappointing. She's very pro-Palestinian and whatever. So her father, who's John Voight, is one of the sort of early, I don't know what the word is, leaders of a basically Noahide movement of righteous Gentiles who believe that basically the Jewish people are chosen. They believe that they don't have to convert to Judaism, but they believe in following certain tenets of the Torah. He's always been an incredible supporter of Jewish people and of Israel. He's basically a monotheistic Gentile. Very interesting. And he's actually told his daughter off in public, which is quite interesting as well. But he's extremely pro-Israel, pro-Jewish. March the 9th, you may have seen an ad, we haven't put the ads out yet, is Israel Shabbat. The chief rabbi has declared as a way of showing support for Israel. So we've got some very interesting speakers coming. Their names are Tim and Haley Gutman. And despite their name, they are not Jewish. They are from Waltham Abbey, Lee Valley Church. And they run CAAA, which is Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism. Do you remember they had that Christian rally after the
AJ
rally that Sunday?
Yes.
So that's these guys. And they're amazing. And they're very respectful. They don't preach, because there are people who are Christian Zionists who are very, evangelical. They're very respectful, and they're supporters of Israel because they believe it's the right thing to do, and they believe it's biblical. It's absolutely amazing. They're very philo-Judaic. They have no aspirations to convert to Judaism or anything like that. They just think the Torah is true, and they love the land of Israel and Jewish people. They're amazing people. They're going to come speak about their work at the Kiddush that day. It's going to be really interesting. So you have people like that. You know, sometimes you think, well, logically, if you think the Torah is true, you would want to convert to Judaism. But it's possible for a person to think the Torah is true and that they are not part of the Jewish people, but it still has a message for them. So you know, you always think, how could you have been at Sinai and not been moved by the experience? But you know, listen, you know, people are moved in different ways. So it's an interesting question. The bigger question is why they always get blamed for everything. The Erev Rav, all the people that came along with them. You know, I'm sure they weren't all bad eggs, but there you go. But yes, I'm not. Thanks to Rabbi Sacks, as ever. If you this week when we read the Ten Commandments, just have a look at some of those verses in the lead up to it. You know, this point about the men and the women and the children, the idea of acceptance of even from the Almighty has created the world, but he seeks our consent to govern us. It's something quite unique. And that's probably a good reason why terror has lasted and we've outlasted other civilizations. Because it has these protections that nowadays you would say are basic, you know, democracy has actually in place, you know, the participation of minorities, inclusion of everybody, you know, the consent of the governed. It's fascinating stuff. You know, it's all in the Torah, like most things. It shouldn't really surprise us at all. But as ever, thanks to Rabbi Sacks, we see how this all material comes from him. We see how, you know, how relevant the Torah is in so many ways. So there we go. So how come Israeli democracy is so messed up? That's a different question. Right. Anyway, so
Have a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes.
yes.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
next week,
Yeah. I'm
next week, hopefully,
I'm
we'll
planning
have
to
the full.
come on Friday night to hear.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes. So we've got
Lovely.
Zach this Friday night. It sounds
Yes.
really interesting. We talked about the Sefer Torah that made it into Gaza. I don't know the rest of the story. You'll have to come along to find out.
Yeah.
But you have to remember there were Jews in Gaza thousands of years ago. There was a chief rabbi of Gaza. Azar is mentioned in the Torah. So you know, there's a long history there. So it should be interesting stuff. Anyway, there we go. All right, have a good week, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
Next week-
Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank
Hopefully next
you.
week we'll have,
Yeah. Bye.
hopefully next week we'll have the full complement of Shurim. Right.